Welcome everyone to the first of the Hanif lecture series on method and theory in comparative theology. I'm very delighted to be your host today, and we have with us our guest speaker for today's session, Professor Klaus von Stosch. But before listening to Professor von Stosch's lecture and learning from his insights and his expertise, I have to say a few words about this series of lectures and then introduce today's speaker. Okay, first of all, I think most of you, maybe all of you, are completely familiar with the comparative theology, but just to be sure, the comparative theology is a relatively new discipline within theology, and to put it very simply, it is a type of theological practice that is committed to deep interreligious learning while staying inside a particular religious tradition. And it's completely different from other related disciplines such as comparative religion and theology of religions and interreligious dialogue. And I think in these 4 series, we are going to understand what is comparative theology and what are the methods in comparative theology. And we are going to get more familiar with this new discipline of theological inquiry. So I just stop here talking about comparative theology. I think we are here to learn from our speakers. But our speaker today is, as I said, is Professor Klaus von Stosch. He has been the chairman of the Center of Comparative Theology and Cultural Studies, SEC, at the University of Paderborn from 2009 to 2021, I think. And since 2021, he's the professor of systematic theology and the head of the International Center for Comparative Theology and Social Issues at Bonn University. He has authored, co-authored, edited, and co-edited many books and articles in the field of comparative theology. I don't have the time to mention all of his works, but to just mention a few, in 2018, he has co-edited with Professor Clooney. He's our third speaker in the third lecture of this series. The book, How to Do Comparative Theology. In 2009, he has co-authored The Other Prophets, Jesus in the Quran, which is a practice of comparative theology. In 2021, he has co-authored Mary in the Quran, which is also a practice of comparative theology. And he has many other works in German, which I'm not going to bother you with reading their names. But many of these works are about comparative theology. And I'm personally so eager to hear from Professor von Stosch and learn from his experience and his insights. So without further ado, please join me in giving him a warm welcome. And Professor von Stosch, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm very glad that we have this meeting here. I just try to kind of open my window, but it seems so that I should first put it like that. So like this, it should be better. Yeah. Okay. No, I cannot move. No. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So I'm very happy that we come together today for this lecture, first lecture on comparative theology. Those 4 lectures kind of define the same idea of comparative theology from different perspectives, but we 4 speakers who will explain that kind of method follow the kind of same methodological ideas. So we try not to repeat ourselves too much. That's why I won't speak about the forms of learning, although I think that they are very crucial. But Catherine Cornell will do this next week. And so you will see different aspects of comparative theology. And today I want to look with you at method attitudes, and aims of comparative theology. So I kind of changed the order and start with the aims, and from the aims over to the attitudes and then to the methods. And I try to explain comparative theology a little bit with comparing it with comparative religion, because I realized I have been many times in Iran and many times tried to explain comparative theology. And I realized that many people kind of, understand it as the same thing. And of course, Mohammad Reza in his kind introduction explained already that there is a difference, and he knows, I know that, he has been here, and many, I'm very glad that many are there whom I know who have been to Germany and know it already. But the idea was also to explain it to those who are not so familiar with comparative theology. So I try to look at the aims of comparative theology now in a way that I compare those aims with the aims of religious studies or comparative religion. And in green, you find green is always the color of commonalities of a method or aim or attitude, which is the same in comparative religion and comparative theology. If it's blue, it's neutral. It might be that also somebody from that other discipline uses that attitude, but it's not necessary within the other discipline. And the red ones are the distinctive features. So aims now which somebody from comparative religion wouldn't accept as a possible academic aim within the realm of comparative religion or religious studies. So, and I go through all of what I explained today rather quickly because I want to have enough time for discussion. And some of you also have read an article from me which introduces, so I don't want to waste too much of your time, but let me try to explain, so the aims, attitudes, and methods of comparative theology. So the first thing is that comparative theology as comparative religion tries to understand other religions on their own terms. So we try to understand another religion as the religious believers of the other religion understand that religion. So it's not about the first step is not a theological evaluation of the other religion, but really understanding it. It's a hermeneutical task. And this hermeneutical task is very much about really understanding the other, living with the other, seeing how the grammar of the other theology works. So a first goal, a first aim is simply understanding, and understanding and especially the otherness of the other. So where the other brings new insights to me, challenges me, all of this wants to be understood. That would be the first step, and something which is, of course, the same in comparative religion. Also, what is very similar is that this understanding of the religious others in his or her own terms has the aim to gain new perspectives. So to have case studies in order to get a new insight of the other religion is also the same in comparative religion and comparative theology. So when I do comparative theology and I deal with Islam as another religion, I do not know in advance what Islam is and what I can learn from Islam and where Islam challenges me. I don't know that from my own religion. I don't know that from Christianity, but I have to learn this through case studies. And that learning with case studies is also the same thing in comparative religion. Also, comparative religion doesn't want to make general comparisons between religions, but uses case studies for this case, for the discipline. What might be common, but is not necessarily common, is the attempt to have friendship between religions. There are a lot of religious studies scholars who are wonderful people and who want to have friendship, but it's their personal agenda. It's not part of the discipline. You can be a good religious studies scholar and don't care about the other religion at all, or the people of the other religion. You might even hate it, and you can still get analytical insights within the field of comparative religion. In comparative theology, the aim is to learn from the other for your own theology. And this is very difficult without friendship, without love. So the idea of friendship is very much that even if your friend is committed to things that you don't believe and that you don't like, you will learn to appreciate what your friend is like because he is your friend. So friendship is a kind of methodological tool to develop that kind of attitude that I will explain further later. That's why it's an aim in comparative theology. So it's an aim to have friends from other religious traditions, not because of ethical ideas, but because of the way how we try to get knowledge, that knowledge is gained from the otherness of the other, and enrichment through otherness needs, in many cases, something like sympathy, like empathy, and friendship makes that easier. So now the points where is the difference between comparative religion and comparative theology. First is that comparative theology is theology, and theology is the logos of theos, so the rational talk of God. So it tries to show the rationality of religion. It tries to show the rationality of belief. For religious studies scholars, they simply don't care about that. Whether it's rational or not, they only care whether it's exciting, whether it's influential, or things like that. But they're not interested in reconstructing a coherent way of a religion. It's also fine if it's not coherent at all. So the idea of pursuit of truth is not a question that you have in comparative religion. Religious studies scholars wants to be neutral, and that's why methodologically it doesn't ask for truth. So comparative theology is like all other disciplines in theology, something which wants to seek for truth, wants to seek for a better understanding of religion, better understanding of your own religion. So it's also about a new understanding, a better understanding of the own faith. So you try to learn from the other for your own theology. And religious studies is not about developing your own religion. It doesn't matter whether you have a religion or not. It's not about developing for a theological system, developing insights from the other religion for your own theology, for your own faith is nothing which is something a religious studies scholar cares of. You might care of it as a person, but not within the discipline. Like, of course, there are religious studies scholars like Angelika Neuwirth or Annemarie Schimmel, who care so much about Islam that on a personal level they learn, and they learn also for their own Christian faith. But it's not part of the methods, not part of the official aims. It's only a personal thing here. So the idea of comparative theology is, if we summarize that it's not a theological reflection on a neutral level before dialogue, which wants to guide dialogue, but it's a theology, it's a learning through dialogue. So it's a result of dialogical engagement, and that's why I try to write most of my books within the field of comparative theology in dialogue with people from other religions. That's why my recent books, some of my recent books were co-authored with Muslim authors to make clear that it's a dialogical enterprise to do comparative theology. So what are the attitudes that we need within this enterprise? So what are the methods used in comparative theology? Again, I start with what is common with religious studies, and again, I put that in green. So the first thing is that in comparative theology, I just see that I skipped the attitude, sorry. I wanted to come to the methods as third step. So the first thing what you need as attitude within comparative theology is humility. So humility is quite obviously necessary in any theological enterprise. It's very clear for all religions that we as human beings will never fully understand God, that God is greater than our understanding. So that idea of what we say in Latin, Deus semper major, or in Arabic, Allahu Akbar, that idea is so crucial for every religion that it's clear that God is always greater as my understanding. God is not only the greatest being, but God is even greater than the greatest. So great that we even cannot understand the greatness fully. So that's why, even if I'm a very, very conservative and even fundamentalist believer within my own religious tradition, I have to admit that my knowledge is only a partial knowledge. I never know fully what the Holy Scripture means, what my faith means. There's a lot to learn because I am human and I talk of the absolute truth. I talk of God. And so there's a lot of space for epistemic humility, a lot of need for epistemic humility. Which should need, and this is what might be a bit controversial, which should lead also to doctrinal humility. So the idea is that this means that also my theological reconstruction of the doctrine of faith or of law or whatever I do within the theological enterprise, that this kind of reconstruction is fallible. And there might be that I have to develop my understanding of it during history. So the teaching of the Catholic Church, I'm a Catholic Christian, so the teaching of the Church in the Second Vatican Council says very explicitly that we have to distinguish the truth that the Church has already found and understood and the ultimate truth. So it says explicitly several times that we are still in the pursuit of that truth, that we don't have it, that we are judged by that truth, and we are not owning the truth. So this means that also in the doctrinal reconstruction, I don't have the truth, I have to learn, and so I should be humble. That, of course, is clear for all religion, all academic disciplines, also for religious studies. It's only not always clear in theology. That's why I'm stressing it so much. A second attitude, which is very important within the field of comparative theology, is hospitality. So hospitality in the sense that I welcome the person from the other religious tradition, not only in my country, not only in my house, but also in my thinking. So that I try to kind of open my thinking for the commitments of the other persons. So for the possibility that this other person has to say something to me. So if I know already in advance that it will be boring and not important, then hospitality is not full. Like if we host somebody, we don't take a new house or something like that. We are the host in our own home, but we try to tidy up to make it nice. In German, we say, feel at home, feel at my home as you are at your own home. So that should be also the theological attitude, that I welcome people who are interested in my own religion in a way that they can connect, that they can understand, that they can get in touch, that I open ways of understanding for them. So this kind of hospitality would be a very important attitude, which of course is also would also be part of religious studies scholarship. And a next attitude, which is very important and which is now neutral, some religious studies scholars respect it, but not all. Some say it's not helpful. But in comparative theology, everybody respects it, is the idea of empathy. So that you must be open to be affected by what you see in the other religion. So, of course, we never know. Affection is, theologically speaking, from a Christian perspective, at least, it's grace. It's nothing what you can train. But you have to be open for it, that what you see, what you participate in as an observer makes something with you. Clooney describes this very well in one of his texts, and in 2 weeks he might tell you more about it, how he enters in a Hindu temple and the goddess, he just makes the observation that the goddess looks at him, which of course is completely impossible from a Catholic perspective. A goddess cannot look, that's just an idol. So what's that? And but then you can say, okay, it didn't happen because it cannot happen theologically. But as a comparative theologian, you would look at it and try, okay, it should not happen, but something happened, and you try to make sense of it. You don't know how, but this would be part of your vulnerability. So Clooney witnesses that very nice in that book that you will read in 2 weeks, that we will discuss with you, that sometimes, yeah, we still cannot make sense of something. But Marianne Moyert described in several books very profoundly how important this is for understanding. So she uses the hermeneutics of Paul Ricoeur to make clear how important vulnerability is if we want to understand something, especially if it's alien, especially if it's something coming from another culture and religion and very far away from us. So vulnerability means that I do not react immediately apologetically and reject everything what is different, but that I try to see what is there and see what it makes with me. Some religious studies scholars, especially younger ones, like that a lot and encourage us to do that within religious studies. Some older religious studies scholars would say that this is not helpful. They would say that this brings you away from objectivity and neutrality, and you shouldn't be empathetic or sympathetic with the religion you are looking at. So the last two attitudes I want to mention are now the attitudes which are completely different from comparative religion. And the first is, of course, that you stay in all that what you're doing committed to your own tradition, to your own religion. You stay in confessional fidelity to your own tradition. So the idea of comparative theology is not that you become hybrid or something like that. Of course, that can happen, but it's not the aim, and it's not necessary and not an attitude. So the idea is that you are complete, you stick to your own tradition, you love it, you are a committed Muslim or whatever tradition you come from, and this stays so. The idea is that engaging with another tradition helps you to become even clearer in your own tradition. I try to give you an example to make clear what I have in mind here, why this might be the case, that through leaving my armchair and going into another religious tradition, that I really learn something also for my own, and that I get deeper into my own tradition. One of my daughters, when she became 16 years old, went for 6 months to Canada during school to learn English. And she was welcomed by a Baptist family, and she didn't know anything about Baptists. She only knew they are Protestants. So she thought, because in Germany it's like this, Catholics are more conservative than Protestants. So she thought, oh, that's wonderful. Not such a conservative person as my father, but very liberal people. I will be there. That will be a lot of fun. So she was very excited. And then it turned out, of course, Baptists, some of you might know, at least many Baptists, not all of them, but many are very, very conservative. And so this family believed deeply that all who are not Baptist will go to hell, especially Catholics. So they loved my daughter, of course, and welcomed them as their own child. But still they thought that she will go to hell because she is a pure Catholic. So my daughter before thought that all Christians have the idea that salvation is accessible for everybody, because this today is such a clear teaching of the Catholic Church that she wouldn't think that any Christian exists who has another idea. She didn't know about evangelical Christianity, and that many evangelicals, including Baptists, think that you have to be evangelical to get to heaven. So she learned something about her own tradition, about her own Catholic identity through going abroad and living in another tradition. And this was very existential and very crucial, and helped her to have confessional fidelity to her own tradition. So that's just an example to make clear, even if you are empathetic, even if you develop friendship. She loved that Baptist family. They welcomed her as her child. She loved to go to Baptist worship. She was part of the Jesus Youth Club. It was a little village in Canada. If she wouldn't have participated in those kinds of events, she would have been very lonely. But okay, so she loved that. She was part of it. She developed friendship and good feelings for Baptist faith, but still she was very happy, even happier than before, that she was Catholic. So the confessional fidelity is not an aim of comparative theology, but it's clear if you start from a certain religious tradition, and if you're a theologian, you will stay in it. That's the main idea. So and of course, that's completely irrelevant in religious studies. As a religious studies scholar, you can be atheist, you can be anything, it doesn't matter. And it's not allowed to be influenced by your own faith. A last thing is that within comparative theology, we believe somehow in understanding. We think that it's possible to understand, even something in other religions. We try to appreciate differences. That's something, as a religious studies scholar, you can be a complete relativist and say, well, those Eastern religions are so different from Christianity or Islam that it even doesn't make any sense to make a comparison that asks questions of truth. So as a theologian, you're not allowed to be a relativist, at least in the Catholic tradition, you're not allowed to be that. And so you have to presuppose that understanding is possible, which is, again, a normative claim made by comparative theologians, which is completely irrelevant for religious studies scholars. So let's now come to the third step. So these were the aims and the attitudes, and now the methods, which is maybe the most important part, of course, because this is how we work in our daily work, and it's very important to understand that. So again, I start with the green one. I start with what we have in common with religious studies. So the first step, if you want to do comparative theology, is learning within the framework of the other religion. Usually this works through studying in the other religious tradition. So, for example, if in Germany we have universities where you have Christian theology, Catholic and Protestant, where you have Islamic theology, Jewish theology, and it's taught by people from those different religious traditions. So it would be, so the idea would be that you can simply become a student of the theology of another religion. At the same time, you are a student of your own religious tradition. So you learn two theologies. And that's how you learn also in the framework of the other religion. But if you learn in the framework of the other religion, so if a Christian student is learning Islamic theology, it's simply learning there. It's not like saying, oh, that's wrong, that's different from my own religion or something like that. But this first step is simply about learning. It's really going into the other framework, going in the other context, which might be sometimes going in another country. So, for example, Boston College, Catherine Cornell, who will talk to you next week, is from Boston College. They have a PhD program there. And you get a scholarship then for 5 years. And 1 year, you get the scholarships to be abroad in a country where that religion is lived. So to be able to learn in that other context, in the theology of another religion. Of course, this includes also learning the normative languages that you need. So you wouldn't read then the Bible if you're a very Muslim student learning Christianity. Of course, you would have to learn Greek and Hebrew to be able to read the Bible in the original version, and vice versa. Christian students would have to learn Arabic to be able to read the Quran in the original language. That's clear. So the idea is that we try to enter another world picture. We try to think within the other world picture. We try to learn the depth grammar. So we try to come to the level that we understand how rules are followed in another religion, even if it's blind rule following. So just remember the example which I gave of my daughter. She wasn't aware that the idea that non-Catholics can come to heaven, that Muslims, Jews, or others will go to heaven or can go to heaven if they are righteous and good persons, that this is part of Catholic faith. She thought that's simply what everybody thinks. Through engage, so it was a blind rule in some sense. It was tacit knowledge. It was not a part of her explicit knowledge. Through the engagement with another culture, with another denomination, she learned that kind of tacit knowledge of her own tradition. And of course, as a theologian, if you are a student of theology, you know much more about your own religion than my daughter knew. But still, I can witness kind of that you learn so many things about your own religion if you are in another context, culture, religion. If you learn in that context, you will learn really a lot, not only on the other religion, but also on your own. That's why Jim Fredericks, I put a picture of him here because he's not one of the 4 scholars I invited for our lecture series, but still he's very important, especially for Buddhist Christian dialogue within comparative theology. He teaches in Los Angeles. So Jim Fredericks puts it like this, that he said, doing theology comparatively means crossing over into the world of another religious believer and learning the truths that animate the life of that believer. Doing theology comparative also means coming back to Christianity, transformed by these truths, now able to ask new questions about Christian faith and its meaning for today. So we will deal with the second sentence a bit later. That will be one of the next methodological steps. But the first methodological step is really this crossing over into that other world without knowing what to do there, just learning with others within the other religious tradition. And that's why he says famously this sentence that I also quoted here, I propose that Christians get up out of the armchair and cross over into another religious tradition. And of course, this invitation is the same for Muslims and people from other religious traditions. So get out of your armchair, try to learn from other religious traditions. That's like the first step. Then, after some years of learning within the other religious tradition, you start to find a certain study subject. So, of course, it doesn't make any sense to compare Christianity with Islam in general, because there's so many different theologies and denominations and ideas within each of those religions that you cannot compare them in general. It also would be completely absurd to compare the Quran with the Bible in general. So we have to find a certain subject. That's again as common with religious studies. So they are not about comparative religion. Doesn't mean that we want to compare religions, but that we want to compare certain traditions, certain aspects. And now the decisive thing is that this research tries to find something new, of course. If it wants to be academic, it wants to be science, you seek for guidance at a point where you don't know what is true, what you want to follow. So usually what you will do in comparative studies is not compare at a point where you are completely convinced that your own perspective is the best anybody can imagine, that it's already perfect. But you try to get into dialogue with another tradition where you struggle with something. You want to learn something. Wittgenstein famously calls it like that, a philosophical problem also always have the structure, in German, it's ich kenne mich nicht aus. So I don't know the way. I don't know where to go. I have a problem of orientation, which of course means, again, showing your vulnerability. And of course, again, this is hermeneutically extremely valuable, as Paul Ricoeur and Marianne Moyert has shown. And of course, this vulnerability can be approached from a Wittgensteinian perspective as well, as I do also, and as I did also in the article which I shared with you. And also, of course, this can be also argued for that vulnerability from a theological perspective, at least from a Christian point of view. If you follow the modern philosophical accounts of Christianity, like in Schelling, for example, German idealist philosopher who is very influential in contemporary Christian thought. For him, it's very important that God reveals God's self with the means of love, which means that he becomes weak for us, for our sake. So weakness and vulnerability would be something which is God's guidance for us if we want to learn friendship, if we want to learn from otherness as otherness. And this, of course, is also an academic attitude, kind of, that you have in all sciences, so also in religious studies. The difference to religious studies is now the third step now. I call it here the hermeneutical mutual inclusivism. So I try to be a good host, to invite the other in my thinking, to help, and I try to find ways to learn from the other. But I also cross over in the other religious tradition in order to think through a certain problem from the perspective of another theology and religion. So these are two different tasks. And what comparative theology tries to do is bringing those together. So my thinking within the other religious tradition and my looking at the other religious tradition within my own tradition. So these are different language games, different ways of doing theology. And the idea is not to bring them together on a meta level neutrally. This would be religious studies scholar-like, but to have a dialogue between the different inclusive movements. And of course, the movement from the other religion is nothing I can do on my own. I would need scholars from the other religious tradition doing that together with me. So if we look methodologically, what we are doing when we're doing comparative theology, so we try to first, this would be the maybe 2 first years of education within a PhD, learn within your own religious tradition and the other religious tradition. And then the micrological turn, you try to find a certain problem where you need guidance and where you want to learn. And then look at this problem from the two perspectives. Of course, with the help also of supervisors from both religious tradition. That's the key thing in PhDs in comparative theology, that you have supervisors from both religions you're working on, that you're not, and not only a religious studies expert, but an expert from the theology of the other religion. And then you bring them together in that kind of hermeneutical mutual inclusivism. But then to make it academic enough is important to bring third perspectives to it. So to include perspectives from other religions, perspectives from theology, perspectives also from religious studies, empirical observations, science, things like that. So it's not about that two religious traditions come together. That would be interreligious dialogue, which is also fine, but it's not academic. So it's not just about coming together as two people from two different religions, but it's about pursuit of truth. It's science. It's an academic enterprise. So we have to include principally all third perspectives. Robert Neville, a comparative theologian from the Methodist tradition in Boston University, he calls it the cloud of witnesses. We need a cloud of witnesses. So we have infinite witnesses, third instances we have to include in our thinking, which of course is something also a comparative religion scholar can do and should do, but because they are not in the pursuit of truth, they can also be happy with just an empirical observation without including too many instances of the third. That's why I put that in blue and not in green. And last step is what Fredericks described in that second sentence here. You come back to Christianity, to your own religion, transformed by these truths, and now able to ask new questions about your faith and its meaning for today. So you bring back your insights to your faith community, and you are able to ask new questions. You are able to develop new insights. That would be here the interesting last step. And of course, this is purely theological. A religious studies scholar, as a religious studies scholar, has no faith community, so he or she can't return anywhere within scholarship. Yeah, my last step are some very quick meta reflections on a philosophical level. So my question is simply what I want to briefly look at is how is it possible to appreciate something what is different from your own religion as a faithful person. So especially if there is a contradiction. So how can we appreciate differences without losing commitments within our own tradition? And I think at that moment, the Wittgensteinian approach is quite helpful because it shows us that there is a grammatical regulative level within religious beliefs, and that I can appreciate how rules are followed in another language game without stopping following the rules that I follow in my own language game. So I can, through participating in the other language game, in the other culture, in the other setting, I can learn pragmatically how successful it is, how compelling, without having any way of bringing it into my own language game in a relativistic way. So I might simply see those different ways of rule following, and following a rule is not a question of truth. So the grammars might simply be different and have certain achievements here, which leads sometimes within comparative theology to look at functional equivalence on that regulative level. And one example would be between Buddhism and Christianity, the idea of shunyata and how this can be related to the idea of kenosis. But I won't go deeper into that because when I look at my watch, I see that I should come to an end. So this is just one hint, which I explain further in my paper, which some of you have read, and I'm also ready to discuss that if you want. But at the moment, I won't explain that philosophical side. I won't explain that further because I want to save enough time for our discussion. So what I explained now as my last point would be in that article, which you see as a fourth point here in my little list. And this was the article which I sent to you, and some of you might have read it. But you see some of my other articles in English that try to explain a bit at length what I try to share with you today. Most of them are accessible online, so you might want to look at it if you're interested. But now I'm very happy that you followed, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing with you. Thank you for your attention.